There's been yet another accident in the Pacific Fleet, the fourth such setback since January. The U.S. Navy is sacking people and searching for answers. Two judges issue a surprising recommendation on who should pay remaining costs for the devastating 2007 wildfires. And much maligned Mission Valley is on the verge of a major transformation. But to what? I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me today on the KPBS Roundtable are San Diego Union Tribune watchdog reporter Jeff McDonald. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, Mark.
Good to see you back again today. Former Los Angeles Times reporter Tony Perry. Hi, Tony.
Good to be here.
And Tom Fudge, news editor for KPBS News. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Mark.
Well, the Navy is searching for answers following the fourth big accident this year, resulting in a total of nearly 20 deaths. The latest involved the Navy destroyer John S. McCain. It collided with an oil tanker this week off the coast of Singapore. A major investigation into these incidents is underway as the public wonders why, in the age of GPS navigation for the family car, Navy ships keep slamming into things. Tony, the Navy took swift action this week on a couple of fronts. Tell us what they did.
Sure. The Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richardson, called for an operational pause for all 277 Navy ships around the world. That's going to be a stand down of a day, 2, 3 days.
Pretty unusual.
Very unusual. I don't want to say unprecedented. That's always dangerous, but nobody can remember it ever being like this. And a little further down in the chain, they relieved the Admiral in the 7th Fleet based in Japan for a loss of confidence in his ability to lead. Don't know what that means. That's the all-purpose reason you can an Admiral. But this is going to be one top-to-bottom investigation. Why? Why, with all the gizmos, billions of dollars of electronic gear and well-trained sailors, how did this happen? How did an oil tanker slam into the John S. McCain with 10 dead, as far as we know?
Yeah, tell us about that search. It's still going on, isn't it?
Still going on. They sent divers into the ship and apparently only found one of the bodies. And there's a second body that I believe they have, but that leaves 8 somewhere, probably at sea. Mm-hmm. And so that when the tanker hit the McCain, it hit it hit at a point where they had the berthing, that is to say, where guys sleep. Mm-hmm. And they're lost now, and they're going to find out why. Operational pause. They're going to look at a number of things. Training, were they trained well? Were they led well? What about operational tempo? That is to say, have we run the Navy so hard for so long that mistakes are happening, or are the equipment, is it run down? So mechanical and human are the two big kinds of errors you look for.
Tom?
Well, Tony, maybe they just need to find some sailors who know how to steer a ship. I mean, why this kind of top-to-down examination? Is there something endemic?
We're going to find out, we hope. I imagine there'll be congressional hearings and there'll be some posturing by the politicians, etc. But we may get more facts. Indeed, have we just run our military into the ground? There's been testimony in front of Congress. We're having trouble keeping the airplanes in the sky. We're having trouble recruiting enough pilots, enough maintainers. A lot of the brigades in the Army are not considered ready. The chief of the Joint Chiefs, General Dunford, has said that to go max now would be a strain to get enough people in the various services. So we're going to look at that. Maybe that has nothing to do with it. We don't know.
Well, go ahead, Tom.
I was just going to say, one of the commanders, I think, addressed that question. He was asked whether there was exhaustion in the Navy, and he dismissed it.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And I've heard that accusation made, and the dismissal is the answer. We're going to find out. That's a hard one to prove. I know that one of the criticisms you would hear is that the Army and the Marine Corps are broken after Iraq and Afghanistan. I personally don't believe that. But there's an argument to be made that certain aspects maybe aren't as sharp as they should be. One of the things they're going to look at is, did anybody hack? Why did they lose navigational equipment at just the wrong time?
Yeah, was there a cyber attack involved?
Yeah, they've initially said no indication of that, but they're going to look more. Even if there's a cyber attack, you can manually override and get out of the way. Now, there is a problem with U.S. Navy ships. They're hard to find. You don't want someone to know where they are. They're not on those maps, electronic maps that are available to merchant ships. So they're hard to find. right? For good reason. Did that cause a problem? Did that oil tanker just not see this rather, well, not small, but smaller ship? Also going to be looked at. Should we run running lights, dangerous as that may be, and when we're in these tight spaces? So we run a lot of ships in tight spaces.
Well,
Have
you
we
mentioned...
just done it to ourselves?
You mentioned the Admiral relieved Admiral Aucoin at the beginning. I mean, how much of this is going to fall on him as they start investigating?
Well, all of it. If you're an admiral or if you're in command, you're responsible for everything your people do or fail to do. It's the only way to run these things. That's true if you're an admiral, general, colonel, major, commander. When something goes wrong, it's your head. That's just the way it works. Now, he may be totally innocent as we think of it, or he may be a scapegoat. We're going to find out this.
All right, we do have you mentioned the Chief of Naval Operations and the stand down and all, Admiral John Richardson. We got a bite from him on this undertaking.
This will include, but not be limited to, looking at operational tempo, trends in personnel, materiel, maintenance, and equipment. It will also include a review of how we train and certify our surface warfare community, including tactical and navigational proficiency.
All right, we talked about this latest incident here, but this year there's been 4 incidents in that same part of the world, right?
The other 2 did not result in death, thank goodness, but a grounding, another ship got hit, I think, by a Japanese fishing vessel. How do these things happen? And you can't really blame the other folks. If you're in the United States Navy, you should be able to get away from fishing boats and oil tankers and cargo ships.
And that was the one in June where 7 sailors were killed.
And they're looking for, is there a common thread? Is there something that links all 4, or are we just looking at the tyranny of small numbers? 4 out of 277 ships, and suddenly we're looking for a link. I don't know.
Now, tell us where this was. It was kind of tight quarters. We think, oh, we're out in the middle of the ocean. How are you hitting things? But that's not
No,
the
it's
case.
very tight quarters. It's near Singapore, and it's a piece of water that is disputed between Singapore and Malaysia. Who controls it? Who owns it? It was the Malaysians who actually helped, as the Singaporeans did too. But the Malaysians were able to retrieve one of the bodies. This is where we navigate. We navigate close in, because if we have to go to war, you don't want to be in the middle of the ocean. You're of less assistance there. We navigate in some of the most heavily congested waterways in the world, the Persian Gulf, for example, the Korean Gulf, for example, Malacca Straits, which the John S. McCain was moving towards. That's where we have to be. That's where it's dangerous.
Tom?
You know, it seems to me, Tony, the fundamental question here is, what are we doing there? Why does the U.S. Navy have to have a big presence in the South China Sea and in that part of the world?
Because if you're not present, you're absent. We're there, as the argument is, we're there as stabilizing force. We're there so that Kim Jong-un does not feel he can do any doggone thing he wants.
Are we trying to keep the Chinese in check?
We're trying to do all sorts of things. We're the only country in the world that has taken responsibility upon itself to shape events in every part of the world. That's a tough call. That's why we have 277 ships. We've had more at other times. These are better technologically. We're there as a stability. We're there to show Asian countries we're their friend, we're with you, so that other people, the Chinese, for example, don't go over and say, we're your better friend. It's a tough call. We've made it as a country, and this is what happens. Also, look what's happened with the aircraft. The Marines have lost a couple of aircraft, an Osprey and a C-130. The Army has lost a Black Hawk, lots of death. And then the question, again, that the Admiral mentioned of operational tempo. Are you running these machines too much? Do you have enough well-trained pilots? Do you have enough well-trained young enlisted to do the repairs? Good question.
Well, what does this do to our aura of invincibility there? If we're there for a presence and showing the flag and showing, the fleet over there, all of a sudden we can't stop hitting
Well, I
things.
think the professionals, in other words, the professional people that run navies for other countries, et cetera, including the Iranians, they know stuff happens. And they're still pretty respectful of the United States Navy. It's there. and it's not going away. We may have our nose bloodied here, but we're not moving out.
All right. Well, we'll see what comes of this entire overview and this top-down and who got the blame and what changes they may make. Going to move on now. San Diego Gas and Electric, not its customers, should pay $375 million in costs from the devastating 2007 wildfires. That's the recommendation this week by a panel of administrative judges with the California Public Utilities Commission, a recommendation that's left the utility defiant and angry. Jeff, start by reminding us just how destructive those wildfires were.
Oh, they were terrible. They erupted all in one day, three or four major fires all in one day in October 10 years ago in the South County, and then in the North County, and then in Fallbrook. People started literally running for their lives. By noon that day, someone had died down at the Harris Fire. The Witch Fire started and burning west and through brush that hadn't burned in years and years. The findings from the Public Utilities Commission judges were that the utility didn't do enough to maintain its equipment, cutting back vegetation and the like, after it was determined what caused the fires, which would be arcing power lines in dry temperatures and gusty winds.
So the conditions were terrible. It was dry, gusty winds, all the stuff, as you said, in areas that hadn't burned, plenty of fuel there, and they got sparked by these electrical wires. 3 dead, 2,500 houses and structures lost. I mean, this was a terrible fire.
Yeah, it was. Well, anybody who was here remembers what a nightmare it was for the entire community. 500,000 people left their homes. Now, not all of the fires were started by the utility. I should say that the 3 fires that were caused by the faulty equipment or the failure to maintain the equipment killed 2 people and destroyed more than 1,000 homes, 1,300, something like that. The utility called it a natural disaster and argued before the commission in all its filings that they did everything they were supposed to do, and it was basically an act of God. The judges didn't buy that.
Where can they go? What's the next route? Litigation?
Well, they've been through litigation. That's been going on for years. Most of the vast majority of the victims got paid off, although not made whole. This recommendation is just that, so it will go to the full commission. The utility will certainly lobby the commission as best it can prior to any decision being made. That decision expected probably later this year, although they do have a habit of delaying.
Is it the money they're worrying about, or is it a kind of precedent they're worried about? I mean, that sounds like a lot of money to us, but to that utility, it seems to me that's a doable. Are they worried about a precedent being set?
Well, I don't know that they worry. I think it's more about the money. If they can add $400 million to their rate base, that's good for all the shareholders and the company as far as they see it. And they believe that they did everything they could to prevent the fires. Now, obviously, the victim community and some of the consumer advocate people don't agree. They cited a lot of evidence that showed that they failed to cut back some trees, knew about some threats they didn't take seriously enough. They also didn't respond in the same way in 2007 as they had to the threat in 2003, according to some of the testimony. So according to the judges, there were lots of reasons the utility should not be able to bill ratepayers for the costs of the fires.
So now, you've got a couple of administrative law judges saying, no, SDG&E, it was your fault, you need to pay up. Now it's going to the CPUC. What's your read of the politics there? I mean, what kind of a chance does SDG&E to have to get them to say, well, no, thanks, judges, for your decision, but we're going to come to a different conclusion?
Well, far be it for me to read what the commission will do. I should say they are under criminal investigation and have been for some years now for being suspected of public corruption in other cases, such as San Onofre and the explosion in San Bruno. So they've, for years, been accused of being a captured regulator, wherein they constantly rule in favor of the utility. So the utilities do historically tend to get what they want because they're persistent, they're smart. It's an incredibly arcane system that very, very few people know how to play. The rules are very complicated. So I can see where they would feel confident they'd recover the money. And frankly, they've been persisting for years trying to get this, and it's only $400 million, of course, only $400 million. Mm-hmm. But they've been trying to get this money since 2010, and they've been rebuffed at every time, and they just keep coming back.
Well, now, the entire settlement that they had to pay out was, what, $2.4 billion?
A little more than $2 billion, yes.
Okay.
A lot of that was covered by insurance. they got probably billion with a B, from other parties deemed to be responsible for the wildfires, and the $379 million that they're seeking to add into the rate base is their calculation of the cost that ratepayers should rightly bear.
Should I be worried every Saturday afternoon in October? Could this happen again? Both, have they prepared, and what about fire protection? What do you think?
Of course it could happen again. Have they prepared? It depends who you ask. They would tell you yes. Some of the people in the fire prevention community, maybe not so much. They would like more resources to make sure this doesn't happen again. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, with climate change, the conditions could come up. It doesn't even have to be October.
Now, Jeff, specifically, these judges, as you said, heard a lot of testimony. They looked at this case closely. What specifically did they determine that the utility should have done to stop the risk, to at least minimize the risk of that wildfire in those conditions?
They should have trimmed the vegetation that comes within the length of these are electrified wires.
Mm-hmm.
The high winds, they arc, they can spark vegetation. The utilities are required to maintain a
lot of it in the backcountry. And
yes. Now, the utilities typically farm that out. They have a whole schedule. And they didn't adhere to their schedule in the Fallbrook case. In the case of the rice fire, they were warned that the tree was vulnerable to coming in contact with energized lines, and they didn't trim it fast enough. So they were imprudent and unreasonable as far as the judges were concerned.
Now, get to Tony's question. Have they undergrounded a lot of this stuff? Have they tried to minimize the risk by getting rid of these wires and doing it a different way to convey this electricity?
They have not undergrounded a lot. That's obviously very costly. It's a whole different
massive project.
Yes, and the access to the equipment is inhibited when you bury it. So there are a lot of reasons the utility has resisted undergrounding these, although that would solve the fire threat.
And a lot of our rural areas still depend to a large degree on volunteer firefighters. People who are selling real estate or teaching third grade, and they get a call and say there's a fire, let's fight it. I mean,
yeah. So
we really haven't professionalized in the way that other counties have.
No, we haven't. And it's funny, well, it's not funny, excuse me for saying that, but
San
Diego County spends as much on fire protection as, say, Orange County, and they've amalgamated all their departments into one county-wide fire authority that's perfectly trained in wildland interface fires, urban fires. They can do the whole thing.
All right, well, we're about out of time on this, but that's another segment for another question as we move deeper into fire season here, and we'll come back and get to that in a few weeks. Well, I do want to move on. It's the dense, sprawling, bustling heart of San Diego, fraught with challenge and opportunity. We know it, of course, as Mission Valley. In the past half-century, the dairy farms of Mission Valley have given way to freeways and big malls, big box stores, traffic congestion, the trolley, endless residential development, and the birth and coming death of Qualcomm Stadium. What's next? Tom, your story this week talks about the enormous challenge facing the Mission Valley Planning Group, which a lot of people probably haven't heard of. What are they tasked to do here?
Well, what they are tasked to do, just going back a little bit, I mean, you described the history extremely well. I mean, ever since the Spanish founded their mission there in the 18th century, it has been very much a central part of San Diego. It's been farmland, and then I-8 came in. Suddenly you had the Mission Valley Mall, and it became a suburban shopping destination. And a couple of things are happening now. One is political and one is economic. On the economic side, retail is overbuilt. I think we all know this because of online shopping. You just don't need the big box stores. You don't need the department stores that you used to need. And that's having an effect on Mission Valley.
Because they built them there like crazy.
They built them there like crazy. We've seen the Macy's store at Mission Valley Mall go out of business. And so economics tells us something has to be done. I mean, these stores are going to close down. Something's going to have to be put in its place. The political end is saying we need housing. I mean, and Mission Valley is being looked at as one way to solve San Diego's housing problem. There are currently about 20,000 people who live in Mission Valley, but based on what we'll call the community plan update, which is supposed to be done by the end of next year, that figure is supposed to double to 40,000 people, and so you got to decide where those people are going to go, where are they going to live.
All right, you brought up a nice segue here. We got Rob Hutzel, who's the head of that Mission Valley Planning Group, and let's hear what he says about what they're looking at.
It kind of has gone through this transformation in 1 century from farmland to a regional center that now is transitioning to a community. And that's what's happening. We're seeing a change from the big box retails and those sort of places, which are really important to San Diego still. But now you see 20,000 people living in the community and the expectation to double that population in the next few decades. Where are all those people going to go?
All right, now, Tom, you see, you look at I-8 going through at Friars Row. We got the trolley. It seems all well connected, but a lot of planning experts say no, this isn't a well connected.
No, the problem with Mission Valley, as one person put it, is it was developed as a bunch of islands. In other words, people said, well, we want to have a Best Buy here, and so they put a Best Buy there, but they didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about how that was going to connect to the Target that's only 200 yards away.
And no way to get there easily.
And really no decent way to get there. You certainly don't want to try to get there on foot or on a bike. One architect I talked to said that Friars Road is a good example of what's wrong with Mission Valley. He says it's something that encourages congestion rather than solves it, because that is the only connecting road between lots of different places. And if you want to make Mission Valley a place to live, it needs a number of things. It needs amenities, it needs parks, there's no school in Mission Valley, and if you're going to make it less dependent on automobiles, you've got to find a better way for people to get around on foot or on a bike. And to those who would think that we're trying to make it less automotive because this is liberal politicians who don't like cars, you have to understand that economics is driving that too, because when you have a car-dependent place, what do you need? You need lots of parking lots, which are empty most of the time, that aren't making any money, that aren't generating any tax revenue, and so that's another thing that people want to change. And it's being driven by politics. It's also being driven by economics.
What about Qualcomm Stadium? Is there going to be anything other than a monument to our civic heartbreak about the team that hurt us so badly?
Well, in this brilliant story that I did about Mission Valley, I didn't talk much about Qualcomm. Basically, Qualcomm is a big question mark. Is it going to become Soccer City? I guess that's still a possibility. Is San Diego State going to jump in there and become the developer and turn it into something entirely different? We simply don't know.
And the planning group doesn't really maybe have much of a say, because it may go to the vote of the people next year, right?
And there are economic interests that are out there ready to scuttle anything that isn't in their best interest, right?
Oh, sure, and you got to keep that in mind. I did want to mention one place which is a big housing development that is very well underway, which is Civita, which is on what used to be an old rock quarry, and eventually it's going to have, they say, a population of 9,000 people, and Sudbury Properties, the developer, is doing what's in its economic interest, but at the city, I guess they've decided that what's good for them is good for us.
Where's our friend Kevin Faulkner in all this? Is he leading, or is he following, or is he doing anything at all?
It's interesting that it never occurred to me to talk to him, because I don't think he is leading. This is a process that at this point is being driven by developers and by the Mission Valley Planning Group. Where Kevin Faulkner is in, well, I think we know where he is on the Qualcomm Stadium.
He's certainly come out.
He was heartbroken like the rest of us.
Yeah, he was.
He was backing Soccer City. Yeah.
He was backing Soccer City, and so we've heard from him on that. In terms of the entire development of Mission Valley, he's been silent.
Now, you mentioned Civita, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's on the north end, west of Qualcomm Stadium.
North of Friars Road.
And they're talking about putting a connector from that community across. That's one of the big problems, isn't it? Getting across north and south and north across the big valley?
Well, yeah. When I was there and I talked to the developer, he spent a lot of time talking about the Green Line trolley and how they want to connect to the Green Line trolley. He got out a map and drew lines saying, okay, this is like 200 yards away from the trolley, this is a quarter mile away from the trolley, but the problem at this point is Friars Road. That road that is notoriously hard to cross is between the development and the trolley. So what they say they're going to do is build a pedestrian bridge across Friars Road, and they think that that's going to solve the problem.
What about Papa Doug Manchester and his property there at 8 and 163?
Well, it's not his property anymore. No. He has sold it, but the old UT property is going to become Housing, I know. How many units? I want to say 400 units, but I might have that wrong. So that's another housing development.
Traffic-wise is terrible right now. If 20,000 more people live there, let alone the workforce.
That's another small city they're throwing in there.
How are people going to get anywhere?
Well, people would say that what you need is you need to make it easier to bike and walk. You need to make more of the trolley system. The trolley stops in Mission Valley can be very hard to find. A lot of them have no major road that's going to take you there.
And you need more of them, yeah.
And one guy I talked to said, well, you need more stops along that line too. One thing about Mission Valley in terms of traffic that is interesting to me is how difficult it is to get north and south. Now, if you want to navigate that place on a bike, they're building this wonderful bike lane down from Normal.
We're going to have to come back to the bike lane on another show. We've just run out of time, but it's an excellent point. There's plenty more to talk about, especially with Qualcomm next year. Well, that wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Jeff McDonald, watchdog reporter for the Union Tribune, former LA Times reporter Tony Perry, and Tom Fudge, editor with KPBS News. Reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. And anytime you want to hear it, wherever you get your podcasts, look for us. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.